Hello and welcome. Let's talk about conversions. And that's converting between two different measures using a conversion rate. For example, say converting feet to inches or inches to feet. You'll see it often written something like this: 12 inches equals 1 foot. And this can also be written as a rate, and oftentimes we call this a conversion rate because it's often used as a rate, 12 inches per 1 foot. Or you could use its reciprocal, depending on what your job is. All three of these representations tell you that this distance of 12 inches is equal to 1 foot. So there's several unit conversions we should know. Inches to feet is a good one to know. Miles to feet also is a good one to know. 5,280 feet in 1 mile. Per 1 mile, you could say. Yards, feet to yards, 3 feet per 1 yard. You could also do yards per mile as well if you want to remember that, but you can get to that through feet. 1,760 yards per mile. Another good one that we should just know are our time conversions, which you probably already know. 60 minutes per 1 hour, 60 seconds per 1 minute, and also 24 hours in 1 day. You can combine these two to determine how many seconds there are in an hour, 3,600. But these are the basic ones. Obviously, how many days in a year is not a bad one. 365.25 is a good estimate for how many days there are in 1 year. That 0.25 kind of accounts for leap years, basically. There's 7 days in a week. These are all ones that everyone knows, and roughly there are 52 weeks in 1 year. If you divided 365.25 divided by 7, you wouldn't get exactly 52, but general work environments, 52 weeks a year is generally how we measure that. Just a few extras you probably want to know. There's 16 ounces in a pound. There are 2,000 pounds in 1 ton. Then you get into all the volume measures like 4 quarts in a gallon, 2 pints in a quart, etc. If you do any cooking, you know a lot of these: cups, teaspoons, tablespoons, all that stuff. So there are also metric units that the rest of the world uses. You really only need to know the prefixes, and they work with meters, grams, liters. So I'll just give you a few of these. So 1,000 meters is 1 kilometer. Now kilo means 1,000. Meanwhile, 1,000 millimeters is 1 meter. Milli means 1,000th. You also see centimeters. 100 centimeters is a meter. And this the same goes for grams. 1,000 grams is 1 kilogram. 1,000 milligrams is 1 gram. 100 centigrams is also 1 gram. You do this with liters. 1,000 milliliters is a liter. And metric is very clean because it just comes out to moving the decimal point to convert these. So these are all conversions you should probably know. Of course, you can look them up online, but I think it's really good to just know these without having to think too much about it, especially the metric ones, but look them up until you don't have to. So if we're going to do a conversion, let's look at an example. Say I want to convert 7 feet to inches. Let's start simple. You can reason your way through this. If you've got 7 feet, and each one of those feet is 12 inches, then you can think, well, 12 times 7 is going to give you how many inches? 7 times 12, 84 inches. Now notice, our measurements went from bigger to smaller, from feet to inches. And our numbers went from smaller to larger. Let's look at the other way around. Let's do 150 inches to feet. You could do the same kind of deal if you have 150 inches and you know that every 12 inches is a foot. Really, you just need to figure out how many times does 12 go into 150. 150 divided by 12, which you'll get 12.5 feet. By the way, that's 12 feet, 6 inches. 0.5 is half a foot. 1/2 foot times 12 is 6 inches. So this is 12 feet, 6 inches. But the question asked to convert 2 feet, not feet and inches, so we would use this one. So you notice here, we had 150 inches equals 12.5 feet. So our measures went from smaller to larger. Meanwhile, the numbers themselves went from larger to smaller. So just to recap, if the measures go from bigger to smaller, then the numbers go from smaller to bigger. They go opposite, basically. Same thing if you go from smaller to larger, then the numbers get smaller. It's a decent rule of thumb that will get you pretty far, especially when you're working with metric. It will help remind you which direction to move the decimal point. If you have a smaller measure, if you're converting to a smaller measure, then you have a bigger value. If you have a bigger measure, then you have a smaller value. And this will kind of give you a hint whether you should multiply or divide in each of these cases. But it depends on what your conversion rate is, whether you should multiply or divide. Let's convert 24.2 pounds to ounces. Once you get a handle on this, if you just have a good intuition about pounds and ounces and which one's bigger and which one's smaller, you know, okay, I'm going to go from pounds to ounces. So that means 24.2 should increase, should become a bigger number. It should be more ounces than 24.2 pounds. If you remember your rate, 16 ounces per 1 pound, then that means you're going to be multiplying by 16. 24.2 pounds times 16 ounces per pound. 387.2 ounces. If we're going the other direction, convert 900 ounces to pounds. The conversion rate is still the same, and since you know the number should get smaller, you'll know to divide by 16. 900 ounces divided by 16 ounces per pound, which, by the way, if we converted this to multiplication, it would be 900 times 1 pound per 16 ounces, which is 56.25 pounds, which is indeed smaller than 900. So you might think, okay, well, converting to a smaller measure means we multiply. Converting to a larger measure means we divide. Well, it depends on what the conversion rate is. So let's look at converting miles to kilometers. Another set of conversion rates you probably should just know are some metric to American units. One being 1.61 kilometers is equal to 1 mile. So already you should be thinking, okay, kilometers, the bit number is bigger, so that means the measure is smaller, so kilometers are smaller than a mile. You might also see this conversion the other way around as 0.621 miles per 1 kilometer. Some other metric ones to know are 2.2 pounds about per 1.06 quarts per liter, 2.54 centimeters per 1 inch. Let's look at converting 270 miles to kilometers. As we said, kilometers are smaller than a mile because 1.61 of them fit into a mile. So we know that my answer should be bigger than 270. So that's a good check. No matter what you do, whether you're multiplying or dividing, it's always a good check to know, okay, the number should get bigger. If I happen to know this conversion rate, 1.61 kilometers per mile, I should be able to multiply 270 by 1.61. 270 times 1.61 kilometers per mile, and that's 434.7 kilometers. Say I didn't know this conversion rate. Say I only knew that there was 0.621 miles per kilometer. Let's do the same thing, but use the other conversion rate. Now, we still know that our number has to get bigger, but that doesn't mean multiplication in this case because 0.621 is smaller than 1. If we multiply by 0.621, you'll get a smaller number. Multiply by a number less than 1, your number will decrease. So instead, we have to divide by 0.621 miles per kilometer. And you'll get the same thing, 434.7 kilometers. But I really want to show you something really, really cool that it's just too cool for me to keep secret here. A method to keep track of all this stuff, to keep track of whether you should multiply or whether you should divide, and all you need is the conversion rates. Whatever conversion rate you have, you can use. So for example, 0.621 miles per kilometer, per 1 kilometer, or the reverse. It doesn't have to be a unit rate, 1 kilometer per 0.621 miles. You can use either one of these rates depending on whether you're what you're converting from and what you're converting to. So this will come from a basic observation about how we use rates. Say I'm going 35 miles per hour, 35 miles per 1 hour, that's a rate. I'm traveling that rate for 3 hours. Miles divided by hours, miles per hour times hours should give me miles, the total distance that I've traveled, 105. It's almost like these units can be treated like variables that are multiplied by the numbers, and they in some sense cancel off. Those hours cancel and you're just left with miles, and that's what gets carried over here. This is classic rate times time equals distance, right? But I like to think of it as A over B times B will give you A. It's just a basic idea of how multiplying by fractions works. The B's cancel and you're left with A. So that's true if it's 3/5 times 5 will give you 3, or whether it's miles per gallon times gallons will give you miles. So let's say we're going to convert 300 kilometers to miles. And say the only rate we have is 0.621 miles per 1 kilometer. Check this out. 300 kilometers. I'm going to multiply it by some fraction, and I need to get some rate so that I'm left with miles. We think, well, what needs to cancel with these kilometers? Got to have kilometers on the bottom and miles on the top so that the kilometers cancel. So let's just fill in the numbers. 0.621 miles and 1 kilometer. And so this tells us what to do. Tells us that this is a multiplication. I didn't have to think about whether the number's getting bigger or smaller. Obviously it's going to get smaller because we're moving from a smaller measure to a larger measure, so the number should be smaller, so this jives with that. But this told me, oh, I multiply. Once I multiply across the top and bottom, which is 186.3 miles. So a fun question to ask is, how many hours are a million seconds? Here's a million seconds. Now, if you know how to convert seconds directly to hours, then you're good to go. But what if you don't? I do know that there are 60 seconds in a minute, and I need to convert seconds to minutes. If I convert seconds to minutes, I would multiply by minutes over seconds, right? Because our seconds would cancel. And I know that there are 60 seconds per 1 minute. Just fill in the numbers. But that only converts to minutes. I ultimately want to get hours over here when I'm done. So I'll now multiply that by 60 minutes per 1 hour. Notice I said it backwards since I wrote it from bottom to top. But what this does is the seconds cancel and the minutes cancel, and I'm left with hours. And now all I have to do is multiply across the top and the bottom. And we get 1 million divided by 3,600. And this is going to be how many hours it is. Now we got to divide that out. That's 277.7 repeating hours. Which, if you want to convert that to days, we can multiply that by 1 over 24 hours, right? So you would cancel hours and get days left over. It's about 11.57 days. I encourage you to check to see how many days or longer, if you need to convert it to a larger measure. How long is a billion seconds? The answer might surprise you. Another place this gets useful is what if I want to convert a speed, 30 feet per second, 2 miles per hour. So now our previous method of thinking, okay, which measure is bigger, which measure is smaller, should this number get bigger or smaller, it's going to be tough to visualize what's going on because going from feet to miles, that's going from a smaller to a bigger measure. So that, in that sense, the number should get smaller, right? Meanwhile, we're going from seconds to hours on the bottom. We're going from a smaller measure to a bigger measure, so the number should get smaller. But we're dividing by a smaller number, so that means the whole number should get bigger. So should the number get bigger or smaller? It's really hard to suss that out unless you really have a good sense of how much each of these measures is. So I just default to doing it using my ratios. You could break this up and just ignore the bottoms for a second and just convert 30 feet to miles, and then you would convert your seconds to hours. But you'd have to, fortunately, I don't have to do that. If I just string together the right things, I can convert these. 30 feet per 1 second, and I think about my goal. My goal is to get to miles per hour. Let's convert our feet to miles first. So 5,280 feet is 1 mile. So feet's on the bottom here because I want to cancel with the feet up here. And that will give me miles on top. I want seconds on top and hours on the bottom to cancel off my seconds. So how many seconds are in an hour? Well, we just did that. There's 3,600 seconds in an hour. You could chain two ratios here, 60 seconds per minute and then 60 minutes per hour. That would work too. But check this out. Because of the things canceled the way I wanted to, I knew which unit to put where to cancel so that I have miles over hours at the end. This tells me what to do. I take 30 times 3,600 on the top, 5,280 on the bottom. That's 20.45 about miles per hour. Anyway, I think that's enough for now. We'll see you next time.